In 2015, a single pilot flew a plane for almost 5 days straight without ever landing and without burning a single drop of fuel. Today, uncrewed versions of the same idea have stayed aloft for over 2 months at a time. This isn't a loophole or a stunt. So what actually lets an aircraft fly for days or weeks without refueling, and what does it give up to do it? The answer involves a plane wider than a jumbo jet that weighs about as much as a car, a battery design that very nearly cooked itself, and a limit that turns out to have nothing to do with energy at all. To understand how an aircraft flies indefinitely without fuel, the equation begins not with power generation, but with mass management. In conventional aviation, raw engine thrust can overcome weight. In solar aviation, weight dictates every structural limit. This physical reality is written into the structural skeleton of Solar Impulse 2. To capture enough sunlight to stay aloft, the aircraft requires an immense surface area. Its wingspans 72 meters, stretching wider than the 60-meter wingspan of a Boeing 747-400. Yet, while the jumbo jet can weigh over 350 tons at takeoff, Solar Impulse 2 weighs just 2,300 kilograms, empty. The entire aircraft combines the physical footprint of a commercial airliner with the mass of a family SUV. Building an airframe this vast yet lightweight requires specialized materials. The primary structure utilizes custom-developed carbon fiber reinforced polymer. The wing spars and fuselage are fabricated from carbon sheets thinner than paper, sandwiching a lightweight honeycomb core. This ultra-low density construction keeps the aircraft's mass-to-wing area ratio at an astonishing 8.5 kilograms per square meter. This extreme structural design serves a single mathematical purpose. It allows the massive wing to function as an energy collector without dragging the aircraft down. The upper surface of the 72-meter span is covered in 17,248 monocrystalline silicon solar cells, spanning 269 square meters. If the airframe were built with standard aerospace aluminum, the structural weight alone would require more propulsion energy than the solar cells could ever harvest. By shedding structural mass, the design reduces the thrust required to maintain level flight. Before the propulsion system can even turn a propeller, the structural equations must balance. The physics of infinite flight do not begin with the engine. The math starts with mass. Once structural mass is minimized, the airframe functions primarily as a flying power plant. The upper surface of the wing carries 17,248 monocrystalline silicon solar cells, spread across 269 square meters of area. Under optimal sky conditions, this expansive array harvests up to 340 kilowatt-hours of solar energy during a single day. How does this energy input balance with the physical demands of keeping the aircraft aloft? The incoming electricity runs 4 brushless electric motors, each driving a 2-meter propeller. Over a full 24-hour cycle, these motors run at a highly efficient setting, averaging only 15 horsepower each. This power draw is incredibly small, comparable to the output of a single gas-powered scooter. Because the propulsion system requires very little energy to sustain level flight, the solar array can run the motors directly during the daytime while routing a massive surplus of electricity into the storage system. This storage relies on a 154 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack, which captures the excess energy generated during the peak hours of sunlight. Flying for days on sunlight alone is disciplined engineering, not magic. If lightness and solar collection were the entire answer, the aircraft would only need batteries to bridge one ordinary night. On this basic logic, the energy cycle seems secure. Store enough reserve to survive the darkness and let the sunrise restart the system. The math balances perfectly. But relying entirely on battery storage to survive the night is a high-risk strategy that tests the absolute limits of battery chemistry. To bypass the limitations of chemical batteries, the engineers of Solar Impulse 2 looked to the physics of gravitational potential energy. Instead of attempting to store every watt of excess daytime electricity in heavy lithium-ion cells, the aircraft converts surplus solar power directly into physical altitude. This operational strategy manifests as a highly disciplined 24-hour altitude cycle. During the day when solar radiation is at its strongest, the aircraft uses its surplus electrical power to climb to a maximum altitude of roughly 28,000 to 29,500 feet. This climb does not just position the plane in clearer, thinner air, it acts as a physical backup battery. By lifting a 2,300-kilogram airframe nearly 9 kilometers into the sky, the propulsion system stores millions of joules of potential energy. As night falls and the solar panels stop generating electricity, the motors are throttled back to a minimum maintenance setting. The aircraft then begins a slow, calculated glide, descending to roughly 1,500 to 3,000 feet by dawn. This overnight descent is not a loss of control, but a deliberate release of stored gravitational potential energy. It preserves the chemical battery reserve by letting gravity do the work of keeping the aircraft airborne for hours. How does this continuous transition between chemical storage and gravitational energy affect the aircraft's physical systems? This is where the engineering trade-off reveals its narrowest margin. At 29,000 feet, the ambient temperature can drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius. To keep the sensitive lithium-ion cells within their narrow, safe operating limits in this hostile environment, the battery compartments were heavily wrapped in thick polyurethane insulation. But on June 28, 2015, as Solar Impulse 2 departed Nagoya, Japan for its historic trans-Pacific flight to Hawaii, this passive thermal protection became a major liability. During the first steep, high-power climb of the 5-day leg, the batteries and electric motors operated at high capacity and generated a massive internal thermal load. Because the battery compartments were over-insulated to survive the high-altitude cold, the internal heat had no way to escape. The aircraft lacked any active thermal management systems, meaning the heat simply accumulated inside the closed compartments. The consequences were immediate and severe. Several battery modules suffered irreversible thermal damage during the ascent. Although pilot Andre Borschberg managed the damaged electrical systems well enough to complete the record-breaking 117-hour flight to Hawaii, the aircraft could go no further. Upon landing at Kalaloa, the team was forced to declare the plane grounded. Replacing the ruined modules and designing a new active cooling system, complete with integrated ventilation, active pumps, and revised insulation, took 9 months of engineering work in Hawaii. The physical reality of solar aviation remains unforgiving. The same insulation built to save the batteries from the cold very nearly cooked them instead. While the engineering teams in Hawaii resolved the thermal limits of the battery packs, a far more stubborn constraint remained inside the cockpit. The real ceiling eventually had nothing to do with energy at all. For a pilot, the trade-off of near-infinite flight is the systematic surrender of basic human needs. In Solar Impulse 2, pilot Andre Borschberg was confined to a single-seat cockpit measuring just 3.8 cubic meters. The carbon composite cabin was too small to stand in, restricting the pilot from stretching or walking. Because adding a heavy environmental control and pressurization system was structurally impossible, Borschberg flew with no atmospheric buffer. This exposed him to brutal temperature swings that approached 80 degrees Fahrenheit over a single 24-hour cycle. During high-altitude night flight, temperatures inside the unheated cockpit dropped to minus 7 degrees Fahrenheit, while daytime desert operations pushed them up to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. How does a human pilot maintain control of an experimental aircraft under such continuous physiological strain? The physical limits of the airframe made constant vigilance a matter of survival. Because of its massive 72-meter wingspan and ultra-low wing loading, Solar Impulse 2 had incredibly low lateral maneuverability. The aircraft could not bank more than about 5 degrees without risking a catastrophic loss of lift and a subsequent spin. To prevent the massive wing from dipping into a terminal descent, the pilot had to avoid deep sleep entirely. Instead, Borschberg survived on a highly disciplined protocol of 20-minute naps, taken up to 8 times a day. To make these brief windows effective, he relied on targeted meditation, self-hypnosis, and guided breathing techniques to quickly lower his heart rate and enter light sleep, while EEG-based ground telemetry monitored his brainwaves to prevent deep sleep. This clinical survival protocol kept a single human functioning at the absolute margin of cognitive capacity, Eventually, the mechanical systems of Solar Impulse 2 proved they could outlast their occupant. The solar panels could harvest energy indefinitely, and the redesigned cooling systems kept the battery chemistry stable. But the human body has no upgrade path. The final unyielding constraint of crewed solar flight is biology. Why accept these extreme physical constraints? The answer lies in the economics of persistent aerial observation. For atmospheric research, telecommunications relay, and national defense surveillance, holding a stable position over a target for weeks or months is incredibly valuable. A high-altitude solar aircraft can loiter in the stratosphere, functioning as a pseudo-satellite at a fraction of the cost of building and launching a conventional satellite into orbit. But to gain this extreme endurance, the aircraft must surrender almost every capability of traditional aviation. Operating at slow airspeeds of 30 to 60 miles per hour, these lightweight platforms carry negligible payloads and possess zero structural tolerance for turbulent weather. For crewed flights, the design demands days of continuous operation with no real sleep for the pilot. The industry builds these platforms for loitering missions, where duration matters more than speed, payload, or comfort, prioritizing station keeping over transportation. Because human biology imposes an unyielding ceiling on flight duration, the aviation industry has resolved this constraint in a predictable way. To exploit the math of solar endurance, the pilot must be removed from the cockpit. The Airbus Zephyr represents the uncrewed realization of this endurance flight profile. Operating in the stratosphere at approximately 70,000 feet, this high-altitude platform flies far above active weather and commercial air traffic. It utilizes the same day charge and night glide energy logic as crewed solar aircraft, but without the payload penalty of life support systems, pressurization, or a human pilot. The aircraft has a 25-meter wingspan, yet its structural mass is under 150 kilograms, less than a household refrigerator. How does removing the cockpit alter the operational equation? Without a human on board, the primary limit moves entirely from biology back to physical engineering. In 2014, the Zephyr established an uncrewed endurance record of 14 days. That threshold expanded to 25 days in 2018 and reached 64 days during a 2022 campaign. In April 2025, the platform set a new benchmark by flying continuously for 67 days, 6 hours, and 52 minutes. Stripping the human element allows the aircraft to remain aloft until the materials themselves degrade. The ultimate ceiling is no longer human survival. It is component wear. In July 2010, the first prototype, Solar Impulse 1, completed a 26-hour continuous flight in Switzerland. This flight demonstrated that a piloted solar-powered aircraft could systematically harvest enough daytime energy to survive the night, proving the mathematical viability of the diurnal cycle under real atmospheric conditions using 11,628 solar cells. 5 years later, the larger Solar Impulse 2 tested this cycle on an intercontinental scale. During its 2015 Trans-Pacific crossing from Nagoya, Japan to Hawaii, the aircraft remained airborne for 117 hours and 52 minutes. How does this compare to conventional aviation? The record for the longest non-stop solo flight using jet fuel was set in 2006 by Steve Fawcett, who piloted the Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer for 76 hours and 45 minutes. Solar Impulse 2 exceeded that jet-powered endurance benchmark by 41 hours, relying entirely on solar energy. The final proof of the program's structural and electrical reliability came in July 2016, when the aircraft completed its global circumnavigation. Over 17 distinct operational legs, the plane logged approximately 550 flight hours and covered roughly 25,000 miles. This chronology proves step by step that solar endurance flight is a reproducible engineering reality. This operational durability relies on 3 technological pillars: high-density lithium batteries, dense silicon solar cells, and the active battery heating and cooling updates added after the 2015 grounding. Together, these systems establish platforms like the Airbus Zephyr as functional pseudo-satellites, delivering persistent stratospheric communications and national security reconnaissance at a fraction of traditional orbital launch budgets. While continuing improvements in chemical battery energy density will inevitably extend the mission limits of both crewed and uncrewed platforms, the scaling boundaries of solar flight remain absolute. This physics-driven design equation works reliably for uncrewed research aircraft and stratospheric relay drones, but it can never scale to a commercial passenger jet carrying 300 passengers at 500 miles per hour. Ultimately, solar endurance flight remains a highly specialized aerospace category. To achieve near-infinite flight, the aircraft must systematically surrender the core priorities of modern air transport: speed, payload, weather tolerance, and basic cabin comfort. Today, the ultimate ceiling of solar flight is no longer human endurance, but the laws of physics. By sacrificing payload speed and weather tolerance, engineers have traded traditional utility for near-infinite duration. These fragile, specialized platforms remain a masterclass in extreme compromise, proving that true endurance requires giving almost everything else up. Subscribe for more deep engineering insights.